Hi. Hello. Alright. Okay. I don't have any makeup on. I'm super barefaced. I actually just got out of the shower before the stream. Uh, yeah. How's everyone doing? I had a bit of a long day. I'm not going to be. It's going to be a short stream today. I'm not doing full 3 hours. And I know I said on Twitter I wouldn't be streaming politics, but I feel like this is informational and less about politics. Um, so thank you. Uh, I don't feel great. I've been pretty emotional the last few days, and I've been doing a really good job kind of keeping it from showing on camera and whatnot. But like like 2 days ago, I was incredibly emotional, and then uh, like I feel like I have an image I need to keep. Everything's pink and bright and cheery, and I want to be loud and hyped up and overexcited, and that's the kind of energy I want to put on stream. So when I have emotional days, I like it's scary for me, if that makes any sense. So I was a little bit worried, but sort of, I guess, in a way that was helpful. I don't even know. I guess it was kind of helpful. I don't know. I'm gonna put the chat box right here so that y'all can see what the heck is going on. Let me move myself a little bit. I'm just gonna make that a little bit taller too. Alright. So, the reason I've been emotional is because it feels like the world is on fire. And obviously, that's not okay. It's not okay for the world to be on fire. 2020 has been a train wreck, and I know there's so many memes going on around about it and whatnot. And like, I was fine with the memes, but and human stupidity, like I'm not fine with it, but I'm not stressing over it. If that makes any sense. Um, Sorry, I'm still trying to kind of get my composure together, I guess. And yeah. Um, so let's review what happened in 2020 so far. We had doesn't help here. We literally have memes that explain month by month uh, what was happening between, Corona and murder hornets and high naysayer. Um, yeah, I can't find the meme now, but yeah, murder hornets, people being murdered, coronavirus. Oh yeah, the year started off with a potential World War III, didn't it? And it's been such a train wreck that it's ridiculous that we're halfway through the year. And then I feel like it kind of gets worse every month so far, at least if you're in the US. Everyone else around the world have their own stuff going on, but I feel like y'all still are mostly facing COVID, not really the race issues. Though I did hear from friends that these Black Lives Matter protests have been going on, not just in the U.S. And this this whole thing is a really big deal. 2020 did just suck. It almost feels like disrespect to say it just sucked though, because it royally sucked. And let's talk about it. Because we had yesterday Blackout Tuesday, and for those that do keep up with my regular schedule, you guys know that I should have had an afternoon stream and an evening stream yesterday, and I chose to cancel both streams for Blackout Tuesday. And wow, that text is super tiny. That's great. Let's try to go 3 and 4 and then make that bigger. Alright. So what Blackout Tuesday was for the people that aren't in the music industry, the entertainment industry, the streaming industry, whatever, where your face is not your brand, you are welcome to do it, to challenge yourself, to get educated about what's happening. And if you are part of where your face is a brand, or where you have a branding and that's your business, whether it be music or whatever, then you are supposed to use that time to mute yourself temporarily, stay off of social media, because the idea is that you have a voice and you want to let the voices that are unheard be heard. Naysayer says, I can't believe people still streamed. I'm okay with the fact that people streamed. I don't believe you ended up taking off. Yeah. I think it's a good choice to not stream, but I'm not condemning anyone who ended up streaming yesterday. Again, this is kind of a political matter, and I did specifically state that I'm not going to get involved in politics using my platform apostrophe S, right? Or parentheses S. But this is kind of a gray area, isn't it? It's difficult to say, like, don't be political in times like this. So I'm not condemning anyone who did stream yesterday. I think that's fine. I think people who did stream yesterday, there were a bunch who streamed and had like charity streams so that people could donate directly to relief funds and whatever. So it wasn't a bad thing. At the end of the day, everything is personal choice, and this is part of why we have gray areas. So I feel like that's important to mention. But yeah, the time that you're supposed to take off yesterday is supposed to be you utilizing that time to learn about kind of what led up to everything happening right now in the US. And on the surface, we're looking at George Floyd. Um, and majority of people have seen that video. Uh, so the story is there was a report about a gentleman that had written a fake check, and the police were involved. They find George Floyd, and apparently he was resisting arrest, but he was not violent, and they used force to get him on the ground to restrain him, and they cuffed him. And within about less than 10 minutes that transpired before his death, the officer that was restraining him was restraining him by the neck in the form of having his knee on the man's neck, and this ended up seizing his breathing, and he slowly, and I emphasize this, he slowly died from lack of air. He suffocated slowly. So he was still alive when the ambulance came, the EMS came, and they took him to the hospital. That's where they pronounced him dead. But at that point, that's 10 minutes of him not receiving sufficient oxygen to his brain. If he did survive that, it would have been a miracle. And if he did survive that, he most likely would have ended up with losing functions to his body or being relatively vegetated and brain dead. In the video where George Floyd, in the video with George Floyd, excuse me, you can hear him audibly stating that he can't breathe. He is no longer struggling. He is a giant man, and he is not struggling. There is no real video of what happened before the officer put his knee on George Floyd, so there's no real saying how violent or lack thereof. So again, I'm not taking sides either or. I'm literally explaining to the extent of what we know happened, which is part of why I feel like this wasn't political. It is to be noted that the officer, oh, it's this Minneapolis, I believe, yes? Let's see. Yeah, Minneapolis. Minneapolis Police Department, they do not train their officers to restrain suspects in the manner that was shown on video. That's very important in my opinion, because what that says to me is that police officers need to be trained better in situations where they have to restrain a person. On top of that, let's go through the American Amendment. Let's see. Alright. So we have a right to life, and the government cannot impede upon that, okay? Incidentally, I am getting my amendments to the United States of the Constitution from the University of Minnesota. Which is, Minneapolis is in Minnesota, by the way. Which one is the right to life? Amendment 1 is freedom of speech. Amendment 2 is right to bear arms. Amendment 3 is no militarization of personal self. Right, the quartering of soldiers. Fourth is the right to your privacy, aka right to not to be searched and seized. Fifth would be grand jury double jeopardy, the due process. Sixth is rights of a criminal. Seventh is rights to a jury. Eighth is protection against unusual punishment. I can't find the general rights to life. We do have rights to life, and that's important to note. So, yeah. So that officer that killed Floyd had he had history of complaints, but as far as I know, he did not kill anyone off. Let's see. He had almost 20 complaints. Let's see here. Somebody has...
All right, Laura Coates, I want to bring you in on this because what we've learned here about the charges...
Thanks. Derek Chauvin complaints. Alright, so... Okay, he had shot Ira Latrell Tolles, an unarmed 21-year-old black man, back in 2008. However, that man has... okay, he was involved in killing 42-year-old Wayne Reyes. So let's look up Wayne Reyes. Wayne was white. I feel like... And then he has other complaints on his record. Yep. Now, Derek M. Chauvin is the officer that was involved in that. Okay. And apologies because I'm not getting all the chat ever. But, yeah. Again, I'm having a really difficult time talking right now because I was so emotional. I'm really, really happy though that I'm not getting extra emotional here. But yes, this officer should have been out of commission for a long time. He had been in the department so long, and he is being tried. He is now being tried, but there were 3 other officers involved, and To Thao, who is a Vietnamese officer. There's a lot of speculation that this entire thing was staged, and one of the reasons for that, they state, is because To Thao has a stitched on badge instead of an actual badge. That also being said, they also find that the back of the car, the license plate says police, and the sticker just reads Minneapolis. People also find it suspicious that when the ambulance arrived, a sheriff deputy clothed in brown showed up, which is actually going to be part of my point, is that everyone's trying so hard to dilute everything right now, and this is one of those things. Tothau had a sewn on badge because he's, I think, under however many years, or he's a canine officer, and they do not have solid badges because they can come off while they're wrangling. Minneapolis Police Department, the license plates are all vanity plates and say police. It says Minneapolis on it. Some of them say Minneapolis Police around the Ford symbol, but either way, I don't understand how that makes this fake. As for the brown clothed officer, that's the usual uniform of an EMS from Minneapolis. They're brown, they have badges, they have EMS badges, so they're not sheriff, they're not deputy, they're not that, they're EMS. So if you see anything like that going around where they're saying that the entire thing was staged to start with, throw it out the window. Don't argue with them either. Throw it out the window. Now, everyone wants to focus on George Floyd's death, but we keep forgetting Brianna Taylor. Brianna Taylor was killed 3 months ago in March, and we didn't see that much news of it. I think we were all so busy arguing about COVID that we didn't see much of it at all. But the easy way to put it is she was sleeping, cops wrongfully intruded on her house, mistaking her house for a different house, and shot her while she was sleeping. Shooting of Brianna Taylor, as an article on Wikipedia states, on March 13, 2020, Brianna Taylor, a 26-year-old African-American woman, was fatally shot by Louisville Metro Police Department officers in her sleep. Her death, along with the death of George Floyd, sparked riots across the world in support of Black Lives Matter. Sergeant Jonathan Mattingly, Detective Brett Hankinson, and Detective Miles Cosgrove entered her apartment in plainclothes in Louisville, Kentucky, while serving a no-knock warrant. Another police officer and an LMPD lieutenant were on the scene when the warrant was executed. Gunfire was exchanged between Taylor's boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, and LMPD officers who entered the apartment. Taylor was shot 8 times, and Mattingly was only injured by gunfire, and there were no drugs found in that apartment. The investigation that caused that warrant centered on 2 people who were already in custody by the time the police arrived at that apartment and were suspected of selling controlled substances from a drug house more than 10 miles away. One of the people in custody, Jamarcus Glover, had a prior relationship with Taylor. The search warrant included Taylor's residence because it was suspected of receiving drugs in the case and because a car registered to Taylor had been seen parked on several occasions in front of Glover's house. According to police, Walker allegedly fired first, injuring a law enforcement officer, and police returned fire. According to a wrongful death lawsuit filed against the police by Taylor's family attorney, the officers entered the home without knocking or announcing that they were police officers and allegedly opened fire with a total disregard for the value of human life. She was an EMT. She was an EMT. She was sleeping, and she was shot to death. I think because with George Floyd's case, we have a video literally showing him suffocating to death. We're seeing that and using that as the example of injustice. But let's not forget that Breonna Taylor was literally killed in her sleep. Now, here's the thing. Everyone thinks this whole rioting thing is absolutely novel. By novel, I mean new. It's not. There's a lot of people saying that the rioting isn't going to help anything. And then I think a lot of people forget that the Pride Parade that we have, incidentally, this is Pride Month, by the way. The Pride Parade is an annual event, and the very first one was a protest against police brutality. Because back in the day, in the 60s, they had laws passed where officers could raid bars, gay bars, and arrest people there. Those that were cross-dressing, those that were, you know, like the drag queens, those that were openly engaging in romance of the same gender, etc. They raided bars that were gay bars or whatever, and they would arrest people, and sometimes it would get violent. And the first Pride Parade is an annual thing, and it should remind us that that's why it started. Stonewall Riots. Let's go look up Stonewall Riots. My internet's being a little spotty today, so forgive me. That was in 1969. Now, mind you, in 1969, the police already had their hands full because they were literally going through strings of rioting by the people of colored population in the US, all over the US. I'm going to get to that in a second. So we want to say that I keep saying we, but I'm not going to separate us. We are standing steadfast, and we are also failing, because we should look at this as a human population, not as individual people. I hate when there's an argument for something and someone's like, well, I don't believe in it that way. I never hurt anybody. I never did this. And I hate that argument. Alright, so the Stonewall riots, my computer doesn't want to tell me about the Stonewall riots. I think it might be just Wikipedia, maybe? I don't know. The Stonewall Riots, also called the Stonewall Uprising, began in the early hours of June 28, 1969, when New York City police raided the Stonewall Inn, which is a gay club located in Greenwich Village in New York City. The raid sparked a riot among bar patrons and the neighborhood residents as police roughly hauled employees and patrons out of the bar, leading to 6 days of protests and violent clashes with law enforcement outside the bar on Christopher Street, in neighboring streets, and in nearby Christopher Park. The Stonewall riot served as a catalyst for the gay rights movement in the United States and around the world. So, riots don't work. That's... Now, the reason 1969, as I mentioned, is important is because I believe that is also the year Martin Luther King passed away. No, 1968 he was assassinated. And right now it's becoming increasingly popular to use his quote about riots are the language of are the voices of the unheard, which is interesting because people are using it both ways. The quote is, "It is not enough for me to stand here before you tonight and condemn riots. It would be morally irresponsible for me to do that without, at the same time, condemning the contingent, intolerable conditions that exist in our society. These conditions are the things that cause individuals to feel that they have no other alternative than to engage in violent rebellions to get attention. And I must say tonight that a riot is the language of the unheard." I also want to point out something about the Black Lives Matter movement, but we'll get to that in a second as well. If you look at the protests and the riots, the peaceful protests that we know Martin Luther King for, they weren't all there were. There were people that, I mean, I feel like it's important for us to maybe go back and revisit X-Men the animated series, because this is what drove Magneto to be the way he was. For the longest time, he was fighting for equality, for mutants to be treated as humans. And realistically speaking, Magneto and Professor X were kind of two sides of the same coin, just the opposite ends. Professor X was content with the possibility of mutants being recognized as humans just like the rest of everyone else in peaceful protest. And Magneto kind of went the opposite, and he fueled that further. That if they're going to keep discriminating against mutants and finding them a threat, then they might as well just claim themselves to be superior. And I'm not saying that's what happened in the Black movement, but if the idea is, when you watch that show, you kind of get the mentality of it, of the suffering and the injustice and all that stuff that happened. There were a lot of violent riots and protests that happened in the 60s. Specifically, that quote that I just read from Martin Luther King comes from the Long Hot Summer. Charles tried his best to get mutants accepted and schooled those with powers to control them to fit into society. Yes. Yes, he did. So, the Long Hot Summer of 1967. Now, mind you, the first set of riots actually started in 1964, when a 17-year-old boy was shot by a police officer because outside of a school that was segregated in New York. All right. The Long Hot Summer of 1967 refers to the 159 riots that erupted across the United States. In June, there were riots in Atlanta, Boston, Cincinnati, Buffalo, and Tampa. And by July, there were riots in Birmingham, Chicago, New York City, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, New Britain, Rochester, Plainfield, and Toledo. The most destructive riots of the summer took place in July in Newark, New Jersey. Sorry, it's not 1964 that happened. That is actually what happened in Newark, New Jersey. The most destructive riots of the summer took place in July in Newark, New Jersey. I know exactly where that is. I've been there. I lived right outside of there. And Detroit, Michigan. As a result of the rioting in the summer of 1967 and the preceding 2 years, President Lyndon B. Johnson established the Kerner Commission to investigate the rioting and urban issues of Black Americans. There was a history of institutionalized unemployment. Black people couldn't get jobs, abusive policing, and poor housing, the ghettos, that were already present in certain areas of the United States, and riots began to flare up across the country, but especially during the summer months. While rioting happened across the country, the Summer of Love was happening in hippie communities, and Americans witnessed troop movements in the Vietnam War and the American riots on the nightly news. And by the end of July, President Lyndon B. Johnson set up the Kerner Commission to investigate the riots, and in 1968, they would release a report blaming pervasive societal inequalities in American ghettos for the riots. And by September 1967, 83 people had died, thousands of people were injured, tens of millions of dollars in property had been destroyed, and entire neighborhoods were burned. Magneto went full blasting against the government, trying to stand up for mutants, but only causing people to be more afraid of those with powers. Yes, that is exactly what happened. So it's important to note that right now history is literally repeating. How is this any different than what happened in 1967? Though right now we have a president who, again, I'm not sitting here being fully for or against Trump, but we have a president who isn't able to sympathize with the protests, despite being able to sympathize with protests and riots in other countries, going as far to blame the leadership in those countries, Iran and China being the main examples, where he specifically told, said if Iranian leaders were to take charge, this wouldn't be an issue. Told the president of China, if you go out there and try talking to the people, they might calm down. Meanwhile, hypocritically, he did go and try to hide away in his own nuclear bunker. And here's the other thing. It is for his safety that he did this. It's just hypocritical that he made that sort of statement and did exactly what any of those presidents would have done, any of those leaders would have done himself. It's so easy to condemn and judge somebody for their actions, but then when push comes to shove and you're in that situation yourself, you make the exact same decisions that they did. That's where the hypocrisy is. Violence is never the option because you're only shifting the focus from actual issue to the violence and people getting harmed. I don't think, see, that's my other issue with this entire thing, is that everybody wants to turn everything black and white, which is ironic on its own. There's a time and place, I feel, for everything. And however appropriate the time and place may be, you're never going to avoid losses. This, again, the fact that we had these riots in... There's a song from Body Count, No Lives Matter, where Ice-T speaks the absolute truth about the situation. I actually saw that get quoted recently as well. But yeah, there's no way to avoid losses. But when we look at the fact that these riots started in 1964 and we're having basically the same thing now, means that there were no change. No change at all. We may not be segregating children into two separate schools anymore. We may be giving, high-paying job opportunities to people of color. Great. We took baby steps to let them get to the minimum expectancy. You should be able to achieve just as much as any other man from hard work alone. Though, admittedly, I'm not going to throw it out the window, the fact that they have a few more hurdles to jump. Especially if they were raised in the ghettos. There are people that I know from Patterson, that I know from Newark, those areas that are the black ghettos of New Jersey. I know people from there that are doing great things in their lives now, but they really had to struggle real hard to get there. I have this one friend who his father is a jazz musician, and he was able to provide for his sons uh, beautiful housing in a rich white neighborhood, and he still struggled to get to where he is today, but he definitely had a sort of easier time than the people who were systematically placed in the ghettos. It's really difficult to come out of the throes of poverty, and that's not specifically race related per se, because living where I am now, there's a lot of poor white people who are also in that horrible, horrible whirlpool of poverty. And it's really difficult for them to rise up above and out of it to do what they need to do to succeed in life. But a lot of these people fell down the hill and went into that. Whereas a lot of black people were born into it and inherited that poverty. So that kind of sucks. And again, hard work does get you there, but I think it's really difficult for people who put in hard work to see how difficult it is to put in hard work. And I'm not saying that people should have no work ethics and be lazy and still be able to climb to the top, though, Jersey Shore. But it's considered a difficult climb because it's difficult. Some people fail at that. And again, I'm not excusing that, but some people fail at that. And then we go, oh, you didn't try hard enough. And we point at them and we push them down and go, oh, you didn't try hard. It's all your fault. And that's silly. I think there's such a separation in society, and it makes me really sad. I hate that with all this going on, instead of people coming together in solidarity, I've seen posts about how black people are racist against Asian people, and how Asian people shouldn't be supporting this because then they're just supporting acts of terrorism. All lives matter. Not until Black Lives Matter is part of All Lives Matter, so all lives can't matter until Black Lives Matter. Cool, but then they don't care about Asians. And I think things like that just really tear me apart, because I don't think black people as a whole are looking at the Asian community and going, haha, you're Asians, we're going to be racist towards you. Though also, not all white people are sitting there being like, haha, black people, we're going to look down on you and laugh at you. A lot of Asian kids were bullied, but they were just bullied. We can't blame that on specific races. It doesn't help that the narrative that they release in the US is that it's a Chinese virus. The US made no real effort to educate the people. They made absolutely no effort to educate the people about how the virus spreads, which is why there's still that massive confusion about, it's my body and I can protect it if I want. That should be optional. It's not about you protecting your body when you wear a mask. It's about people being protected from you who could be a carrier and you don't know about it. But they don't see that far. They just see this as, oh, this protects me. That's not what it's there for at all. And through recent discussions, I realized that people really don't know how these masks work. There's a reason why gas masks are inefficient. There's a reason why the silk masks, what was it that I heard recently? If air is flowing freely, then your mask isn't effective, is what I was told. And that's not true. Your germs are just being redirected. When you talk without a mask, your germs and whatever air is coming out this way. The projectile goes this way. With a mask, it's impeded. And preferably, they come out the sides or up and down, just not forward. So if you're having a difficult time breathing through your mask, that's no good. You should be able to breathe comfortably through your mask. Or find a mask that lets you breathe comfortably. Which is why they specifically point out that your nose is covered with a mask, great. But if your chin is not covered, not so great. Because you're not redirecting the flow of the air. Your mask should be covering your chin. But people don't get that. People don't understand because nobody educated anyone on what's going on. We want to do the whole, this guy ripped off your taxes. That guy ripped off your taxes. This guy is morally incompetent. That guy is morally incompetent. And this comes from both sides of politics. Vote for this person, and it's sponsored by that person. Vote for this person, it's sponsored by this person. But really, we can't spend any of that to educate the people about what's going on? Hello, Pindo7, 007. I saw someone constantly use his hands to lower his mask under his chin just to take hits of his cigarette. I've seen a lot of stuff like that here as well. And it's sad. But it's all a result of lack of educating, lack of letting people know what it's about. Lack of education is how we end up with all these conspiracy theories because people want to think they're educated. US has a high education rate and we take pride in that, but we're not actually that educated because the education stops after education stops. You graduate high school, you graduate college, and all of a sudden you're a know-it-all and you don't need to learn anything anymore. We have all this social media, all this outlets of news, which is an informational outlet, and we're not utilizing that in a way to educate people. And this in turn takes a person who's not educated but thinks they're educated into looking at news articles and being like, I'm gonna be smart and repost this. It's gonna make me feel smart because I feel educated. And it's a lack of education. I don't think it's a lack of information, but an increasing problem of lack of education. And I'm not talking about stuff you learn in school. I'm talking about stuff you should be still learning after you graduate school. And this is why I feel it's absolutely much more prevalent in people that are older. The boomer generation, the late millennials, you look at those people and those are the ones that are perpetually drowning in this negligent information. The whole the whole George Floyd killing is a conspiracy and a setup. Whoever made that, I bet you, is a late millennial. Someone, in their mid to... Hello? Welcome to the stream. Someone who's in, the mid to late 30s and, like, boomer age people. And I'm not trying to use the whole boomer age people thing and these really stupid labels, honestly, to say that that's what it is. But it's just, again, so much more prevalent the older people are because they're just that distance away from the education they initially received. Oh gosh. Excuse me. Ugh. And it's sad. It's just really sad. I yes, I did sneeze indeed. Oh, sorry. So we're talking about right now the I took off of stream yesterday so that I can educate myself on the whole Black Lives Matter, and thank you, thank you for the bless you. But yeah, the whole Black Lives Matter thing and the Blackout Tuesday that I participated in yesterday, and I took that time to go over and learn and kind of read many different articles and whatnot. Even my big thing ever, anytime I discuss anything or anytime I want to learn about anything that have people with such strong differing opinions, is to look at the differing opinions, such as the whole all lives matter thing. Side note, people who preach all lives matter as an argument against Black Lives Matter, they don't understand Black Lives Matter. There are people that legitimately think that all lives matter uh, is an argument against Black Lives Matter because Black Lives Matter is, to them, uh, specifically saying that black people are superior against all other races and only Black Lives Matter. It's a lack of understanding that fuels that. And then what I realized is that Black Lives Matter, it may literally say Black Lives Matter, but in actuality, Black Lives Matter is a representation of all minorities that are being treated unjustly against the majority. So it's not specifically blacks against whites. It's not, you know, like Hispanics or whatever. It the lack of help that that the U.S. is able to send out to refugees outside of the U.S., that is part of Black Lives Matter. The majority of wealthy people in northern New Jersey, who are incidentally all Koreans, that use Spanish people as cheap labor, like really unfair labor, and the Spanish people would be able to use Black Lives Matter for that. It's not just about police brutality, it's about representation of all minorities. But right now, the biggest fire we're trying to put out is the police brutality and injustice towards the black community. That they're just not held accountable, which is what started those riots in the 60s. So again, if you ever see anyone that talk about all lives matter in an argument against Black Lives Matter, it's them honestly thinking that when you use Black Lives Matter, it's to say that only Black Lives Matter. I feel like if you understand where the opposition comes from, it's going to be much easier for you to handle arguments and especially sympathy. I know a lot of people don't want to give any sort of sympathy towards people that are not on their side, but I think that's just so important. All this rioting is them saying, sympathize with us, listen to us, we're hurt. That's what that rioting's about. That's what the protests are about. 60 years, basically. 60 years, basically. There have been violent protests, there have been peaceful protests, and none of it has made a difference. Or not enough of a difference. I really shouldn't dismiss the difference that we have had so far. But, like, does that make any sense? There was an article that I read a while ago about this guy, he's super white supremacist, and the first person to point out, like, he, oh, well, my cousin, he is married to a black girl, so I can't be racist, token black card. um, and one day he decided to shoot up uh, a mosque, and after he was arrested, the mosque raised money to bail him out and invited him to their mosque to, welcome him. And that act of love and sympathy and generosity, he went up to the podium, he started crying and apologizing that he was so wrong, that he dehumanized them when they were humans. I bought a Taiwanese housemate. I'm definitely not racist. Yeah, kind of. Like, everyone has a token card that they like to use when somebody accuses them of something. So, if they accuse you, and this is only in mediocrity as well, which is why mediocrity is dangerous. Hello, are you stronger than yesterday? Yes, I am stronger than yesterday. Ooh, or I have a Mexican gardener, I'm not racist. If I'm employing them, I must be for them. Yeah, right. That's kind of how it is. But yeah, everyone has a token card. Anytime, but again, it's in mediocrity. It's in mediocrity, and the people that are immersed in mediocrity, doing the wrongdoings or believing the wrong things that they do, they don't believe that it's wrong because what am I talking about today? We are talking about mainly what I learned yesterday when I took off and canceled. I had two streams that I was scheduled for yesterday, and I canceled them so that I could learn about Black Lives Matter movement as well as Blackout Tuesday. Learned a bit more about Breonna Taylor. I apologize. Breonna Taylor's death, as well as George Floyd's, about the officers that were involved in those, about the history of these protests and riots, and the history of riots in general in the US. So I do, everyone has an opinion. Everyone has sides that they take. So it is okay if you don't take sides with me, and it is okay for me to be wrong. You're from England, just outside of London. I'm gonna say this now, at least from what I see in the media. You guys have quite a bit less racism than we do here, at least towards the people of color. There was a documentary that I watched of Chinese immigrants that were not welcome in the UK for a while. So racism exists everywhere. Just in general, I think it's difficult when society's affected, right, by a certain group of people, and then that ends up being the label for the entire group of people, and I think that makes it really difficult. But yeah, going back to the whole mediocrity thing, right? If you the politics in the US are specifically geared to please you and appeal to you personally in the gray area. And I honestly believe that is how Trump won the election. He appealed to the extremists, and he appealed to the people in the mid-level. We have less racism because we are less diverse. I think that the more diverse a country is, naturally more tension there will be, because there is an increase in a fight for power. That's an interesting thought. That is an interesting thought. I can't speak for London. I can't speak for England. I can't speak for anything really outside of the US because I have not been there. So I'm not going to attempt to. I'm from the UK. We do get racism here. Yes, you guys definitely do get racism there. I'm not saying diversity is all bad, but it is just a byproduct of it, in my opinion. I think this is one of those things where if the needle points far enough, it's just going to reset back to the beginning kind of thing. This is a weird way of looking at it, but when I play I'm a gamer, guys. When I play video games and I see this varied differentiation of people and races, I literally don't sit there and think, oh, that person is like this, that person is like that. There's no judgment on any sort of race. Because, why? There is a reason why. The game doesn't put you through the history of how all these people came to be there. There's a point in that because racism goes a lot further than just white versus black. It is in human nature, I believe, to differentiate and classify. I think it's innate human nature to put labels on things. Because way back when, like, take it back to, the caveman days, right? They had to be able to differentiate between their immediate family and their non-immediate family and assess them as a threat. And then when they became more civilized, it was, again, us versus them mentality that kept them safe. This is how all these wars started. This is how civilization grew within their little corner pockets, and then their borders started clashing, right? There's plenty of research done with kids. They don't see color the way we do. It's easier. It's a product of uh, being familiar with your environment. Right, but that's something you grow into. And I think this is why when you have children in a diverse environment, it's easier for them to accept the diverse environment because that's a learned trait. Unconscious bias is another problem. Yes. That's also a product of that's also a product of society. I mean, you go to uh hello, Benno. You go to places like again, I'm from New Jersey, so that's the best I can do here. You go to places like Fort Lee, where a big portion of the population is Asian, and they talk, speak, and act Asian. So you have the white people, the Spanish, and the black people that grew up there also act Asian because they're a product of their environment. And then you have me, who grew up in a rich white town, and when I initially moved to Fort Lee, they would look at me and tell me that I was a Twinkie, right? I'm yellow on the outside, but I must be white on the inside. I talk like a white girl. I do this, I do that, but I'm not Asian to them. And I'm a product of my environment as well. My favorite genre of music is rock because that's what everybody in my environment listened to when I was younger. Meanwhile, my friends that are from Fort Lee, their favorite genre of music is K-pop because that's what they listened to when they were my age. Like, everyone's kind of a product within the bias of their environment. So the racism is taught, but it is also, in a sense, innate. It's not specifically racism that's innate. It's the ability to see differences in us versus them. That's innate. And this is why there is such a big disparity versus, even within the gay community, right? There's a big disparity between straights and gays, and then there's a big disparity within the LGBT community, asexuals, and they're being accepted now. And then there's the homo romantic and the hetero romantic of the asexuals, and they're slowly starting to get accepted because there's quite a bit of hypocrisy in not accepting someone that's not the same as you. So to me, police brutality against minorities is overblown. I think it's more a problem of the authority police have in general towards everyone rather than a race problem. I think the race thing is just fueled by media. I think that that is part of making things black and white. There is definitely police brutality against uh, the majority. I know gays that don't accept that bisexuality exists. Yeah, exactly. It's the whole if you're not like me, then I don't like you. Um, I do think that the police brutality is towards a lot of people. It is, and again, I always look at the opposing argument to whatever I believe in first, right? And the one that a lot of people like to point out are the statistics that say there's more white people killed by police in a year than black people. Except when you think about majority of those cases and how they went down, a lot of the cases where I was specifically actually looking up. Yeah, I was actually specifically looking up unarmed cases of police brutality, and you gotta admit it's pretty all over the place. They go to an area where well, there's quite a bit of research I did on this. My brain is going blank now. 400 and something white people died, I believe, in either last year or the year before that. The statistics may have been from 2018. And then 300 something people died that were black. 100 something people died that were Hispanic, and I think something like 40 something people died that were of any of the other races, the etc., so to speak. And you look at the fact that a lot of these deaths come from areas where people have the right to bear arms. It was about 1,000 people who died altogether from police last year. I mean, this takes me back to what I was saying originally when I started the stream, which is that I think police in general need to kind of watch what the heck they're doing. The again, especially this case with George Floyd, the whole knee on the neck thing is not a method taught by that police department. It's not an accepted restraining method. Police in general need better training. Yes. I think police in general need to be held more accountable. And again, I think this is where a lot of people get a little lost, is that the whole Black Lives Matter thing, again, is not, the issue is not just cops. There is definitely racism involved. Definitely racism involved. 100% for sure. See, this is why I don't like using the George Floyd murder, because how can you look at having Tothau in with the other three, with the other, being part of the 4 officers that were at the scene that were being videotaped, and call it white supremacy? How do you have a white supremacy representative that's Vietnamese? So I don't like using the whole George Floyd thing. Brianna Taylor, on the other hand, that is super tragic, and that to me is pretty black and white. She died while she was sleeping. The issue is poor versus rich. See, we can't say the issue. There's multiple different plethora of issues. And that's kind of my point, right? Is that this is not all black and white. We can't say, oh, this one thing is the reason. This one other thing could be the reason. When it's hundreds of different issues that came together to form this one huge issue. There is a systematic poor versus rich going on in the U.S. It's much more difficult for you to come out of poverty if you're already poor, whereas it's kind of generally accepted. The more you have, the more you get. The less you have, the less you'll have. If you're below a certain line, then you're going to keep going down. If you're above a certain line, you're just going to keep going up. And my household, as soon you look, you can afford a lawyer, police will treat you better. That's also not true. There was the lawyer who was driving an Uber where his passengers were arrested. His car was stopped, and they told him that he's going to go to jail if he doesn't stop filming. And he's like, can you explain to me when that law was made? And they go as far as being like, yeah, it's a very recent law. And he goes, well, you know, it must be a very recent law because I've never heard of it and I'm a lawyer. And he's like, oh yeah, you're a lawyer? Okay, sure, buddy. And he goes, do you want my bar? Like, I work at the courthouse. They don't believe him. And then another cop finally comes along. He's like, oh, hey, I know you. I've seen you, blah, 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 blah. And you just don't, you know, you're just not easy to recognize. And he's like, yeah, I know, because I'm not in a suit like I am when you guys see me. So, yeah, there's no real backpedaling. There's a huge portion of pride going on. So the police, when they get challenged, they're just kind of like, oh, hardy har har, you're stupid. It's literally the no you argument. The police issue is just abuse of power, which will always exist when power exists, and power will always exist because to have a controlled civilized society, you need to have a hierarchical system, in my opinion. That's why the justice system is important. It needs to serve justice because these things are inevitable. Police issue is just abuse of power and lack of accountability, which is also abuse of power. If they were able to be held more accountable, because if you're, you can get charged for manslaughter for accidentally running somebody over and killing them. But you can be a police officer, have, 20 deaths that weren't really justified, but the police department will always bend over backwards to try to say they are justified. We believe that this officer was acting within reason. I live in the UK though, so I don't know what it's like fully there. So my experience is oh, thank you for the follow, by the way. My experience is within the US. I've lived in the rich white areas, and I've lived in ghettos of all sorts. I've lived for a short while in the black ghettos, I've lived for a short while in the white ghettos, and I've lived for a short while in the Hispanic ghettos. I can tell you that police here are clowns. They're fearful of being racist, and so therefore don't look into crimes by minorities. That's also interesting. Trailer parks sound fun. I'm playing a lot of Grand Theft Auto lately, because I can actually pause when I'm in single player, unlike some of the other games that I'm playing recently, right? But yeah, I've been going around as Trevor in the trailer parks, and that's actually where I prefer hanging out in that game now. Let's see. I'm just gonna allow that here. Here. They allow mass rape and sex gangs to continue with clear evidence. They turn their heads at it, and it's very sad. We also have that, honestly. We also have that in the US. If your criminal organization is big enough, they will leave you alone because they can't mess with you in fear of their own lives. In Korea, because this is the only other experience that I have here. In Korea, Guns are outlawed, kind of like they are overseas in the UK, right? Um, Knife violence is also prevalent, kind of like in the UK. The police officers are not armed. The police officers there are expected to handle all the minor things to all the big things. And in a lot of areas, the officers are very intimately aware of the civilians that live in their area. So you go to a place like Seoul and you have police officers there, and it's difficult for them to perform their job because they don't know the people that are there. And then you have people in the rural areas of Incheon who usually know basically all the residents on a first name basis. And Um, here, it's not about them being too big. These can be taken down easily. It's just the police don't want to be seen as racist. Yeah, I mean, every country has their own issue with how to enforce policies, rules, regulations, etc. I run a Minecraft server, and we have not like the racism issues and whatnot, but I understand the struggle that enforcing policies and laws can be like when I see so much of it in a small server like mine. So every point of officials and policing have issues like that. It's it's uh it's insane. Um yeah, so in Korea, Korea is still very heavily run by black market crimes. Uh, we don't have coke houses quite like they do in the U.S. We don't have those in Korea, and but yeah, when they need to do bigger things, they have an entirely different squadron of police that handle that. But when it comes to minor scuffles, like somebody writing a fraudulent check, you send the regular police over to check on that. And if they don't comply, you usually go, okay, well, I don't have the strength or the will to really fight you, so I'm going to show up at your door later. See ya. And that's how they do things. And then in the US, they're like, I have to have you here and now. I'm going to arrest you in whichever way and not be situationally aware and do things, cuz that's how they're trained. That is how they're trained. It's a clown show literally everywhere. Like I know I make it sound like I'm praising the Korean police departments, but it's not a praise cuz when push comes to shove, they literally back out of the way and they hope and they hope for better help to arrive. So sometimes you'll have these drunkards out on the street that said one wrong thing about another drunkard, and they'll start fighting and they'll start getting the crowd involved, and it turns into a riot. But the local police are like, oh, we're not equipped to handle that, so they'll back off, and it can go for literally hours until basically the riot police arrive and they can actually take them down. And even at that, because they're taught to prioritize their health so much, that there isn't a lot that's done to help. And so there's, again, two sides of the same coin, right? You have one extreme, you have the other, but they really kind of end up resulting in being and doing the same thing. So there's no black and white answer. And I'm going to keep going back to that because, again, everyone loves to say, this is the issue, this is the problem, it's that's what caused this, and we want everything to be so black and white because it's easy when it's black and white, right? You have a scale and it's hard to see what's unbalanced when it's like this, but when it's like this, that's obvious. It's very obvious what the difference is when the scales go like that instead of this or this. It's so much harder to make sense of this than this. And everyone wants everything to be so black and white. So black and white. And there's so much irony in that, and people don't see it. And I don't understand how you don't see it. How do you not see it? How do you not see the irony? And again, the I have absolutely no idea why I'm coughing. There's a reporter. I'm kind of like hopping on an entirely different topic, I guess. But there's a reporter, a photojournalist, excuse me. She's not exactly a reporter. And she got hit in her eye with a rubber bullet. And she got that eye surgically removed because it literally burst and there was no saving it. There was a gentleman who was hit in the face with a tear gas canister, and he also lost his eyes. So it's, again, not just black people. The journalist is, I believe, she's Hispanic, and the other guy, I believe he's oh, excuse me, I believe he's white. But yeah, why did they need to lose their eyes? Why are police shooting rubber bullets at the faces of people? And going back to 1967 with the 17-year-old child that was shot, why did it take 3 shots to the kid's back? If you're close enough and there's nobody else, you should have situational awareness enough that the worst you do is shoot at the extremities. You're supposed to be taught to shoot, you know, the feet and the arms of people. But then again, you go to any shooting range where police officers train, and they get rewarded for shooting the dummy at the chest or the face. Usually the chest. And it's, you know, again, video game mechanic wise, what's the easiest target to hit? If you look at a target and you look at their hitbox, their chest is the biggest hitbox. So I do get it. But it's still wrong. And then we had the one officer who, in general, if somebody's running away from you, maybe trying to shoot them down isn't the best idea. If they're coming at you, or if they're trying to attack you, or if they're running away from you because they're trying to attack someone that's on the other end, like, then maybe you could kind of justify shooting. But if someone's running away from you, you shouldn't be shooting. And then on top of that, you shouldn't be repeatedly shooting. And on top of that, if you know you're already really sucky at aiming, maybe you shouldn't be shooting, because like that one police officer did, he didn't hit his target once in the shootout. He shot literally everyone else that were pedestrians that were not involved in the gunfight. So maybe if you know your aim is bad, hoping to hit your target while there's innocent civilians around is not a good choice. But again, they're not aware. They're not aware of their situation. There's no situational awareness, because there's no training for situational awareness. I also don't believe in, and this is something that's really personal, and I know a lot of people disagree with me on this, and that's fine, but I personally do not believe that you should be able to join the police department without a mental eval if you're a vet. Actually, overall, you shouldn't be able to join the police department if you don't have a mental eval. Because a lot of military, retired military, have PTSD, and though they may seem entirely normal, all it takes is one cocking of a gun or the trigger or bullet shot sound for them to immediately react. and military are trained to kill. So maybe these aren't the people that we should be having in the police departments. You want to give them an office job, sure, but the majority of them don't want office jobs. And then also on the other hand, we're going, oh, but the vets don't have anywhere that they can get employed. Well, did you think about employing them? Maybe. Did you think about helping them get employed instead of being like, oh, they just can't get employed? So police stations the only ones that'll take them, which is also not true. Especially at this point, this is something that you don't see on the news outside of the U.S., I'm sure. But the U.S., a lot of bigger corporations are trying to really make it easier for vets to be hired. Military vets have a really high rate of homelessness. And they don't even have to be drugged up. It's really difficult for those people. But there's a lot of corporations and small businesses also that are specifically hiring military vets. And generally speaking, if you see a problem, maybe you can do something to help it, right? But I feel like that's not what happens around here. And it's sad. I can point out like all the little things that are wrong, and it's so difficult to point out the little things that are right. And also in general, when you see things on the news, they'll point out all the wrong things and they'll never point out any of the right things. Because what's right is expected. So everything that doesn't go as expected is newsworthy. So you have people donating to charity. I really want to know why I'm coughing. I have absolutely no idea why I'm coughing. Anyway. You take people who donate to charity, that's not newsworthy. I think cops should get more psychology training. Lots of conflict can be avoided that way. I think it would do some good for a lot of police officers to be able to get on video conferences with other police departments from around the world. Because other countries, the way they train their officers to do the same thing that the officers are doing here is so drastically different. We have the ability and the technology to be able to see what people do on the other side of the world, but we don't. The lack of sympathy is from not being able to relate to other people. The lack of the being confined in our own social confines is, again, from the lack of not being able to see outside of them. So, again, I'm talking about Korea, right? Maybe if you know, American PD once a month they are able to set up something with police stations not from the US and see how they deal with things. One, it would show the police officers, hey, there's more to it than what you're doing here. These guys are also facing similar challenges, even if it's not across the world. Maybe if LAPD and NYPD had a video conference and saw what they do, you know, and a lot of American police departments are kind of working on that. Don't get me wrong. I don't believe in the whole kill the blue pigs thing. I don't believe in that. If someone is aggressive, taking an aggressive stance escalates the situation. Truth. Aggression is easily fueled by aggression. You don't take a fire and blow on it violently. You see a fire, you want to take out the source. Smother it. Something. Though, don't take that as me saying, you know, cops should be smothering people to death. That's not it at all. But yeah, I feel like there's a video that I watched of a Chinese police officer this dude comes into the police department with a gun, and he's crying, saying, I don't remember what, but he was blaming them for something and blah 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 blah. And the officer, who is literally just sitting there, he sees this gun pointed at him, and he's reasoning with the guy, not approaching him, staying calm, reasoning with the guy. And not everyone can do this, I understand that, but I believe training can help. But he's there just kind of like, okay, I guess you must have had a really hard life, huh? Does your family know what you're going through? Did you have anyone that you're able to talk about it with? Do you want to sit down and talk about it with me for a bit? Do you can we talk? I'll listen to you, dude. I mean, you want to shoot me, there's going to be another cop to back me up later. Like, it's not going to make a difference for you or me, but why not take this opportunity and we can just talk this out? I'll listen to you. I'm sorry that you're going through what you're going through. And the guy literally drops it. He starts sobbing, and the officer, that's when he approaches him and he gives him a hug. Turns out that guy had been recently made homeless, jobless, nobody's willing to hire him, this, that, and the other thing, and his life was falling apart. It had something to do with the cops. I don't really remember what, but there was so much sympathy in that video from the police officer to the perpetrator. And this was literally in a police station. He fed the guy calm logic and tried to reason with him and sympathize with him. Now, if he saw this dude with a gun, and he's like, oh my god, this dude's coming at me with a gun, hold, freeze, don't shoot, or else I'll shoot you, chances that he would have shot are probably much higher. Much higher. It's sad. It's so sad. Everything is sad. This is all sad. It's vile. But if excuse me, if racism is a product of how you are raised in your environment by the environment, then maybe part of the solution is to open their eyes to other environments. And I don't think there is one solution, because again, like I said, there's police departments all around the world that are also having struggles and issues of their own, and what I'm saying right now probably wouldn't help them. Who knows? But and again, there's so much more to an issue than just that, so much more to an issue than turning it black and white, then turning it into, oh, rioters are ruining other people's lives. There's more to it than that. There's more to everything that's going on than what you see in black and white on the newspaper, on the news websites, in an article, in a vlog video. From what I'm saying alone, there's more to it than what I'm saying alone, because all of this, especially right now, what's happening in the US, these riots, is 60 years. It's 60 years of unheard voices, issues, hurt, and injustice on both sides. From police officers to minority communities, from minority communities to other minority communities, from minority communities to whites to other minorities, from whites to police officers, from whites to, like, literally, if they exist, there's some kind of tension there between another group. And there's no way 2-3 hours of me sitting here on camera is going to just miraculously, turn on light bulbs for people, because majority of people that may be watching this right now, I think not necessarily agree, but see where I'm coming from. Like you're not the people that I have to convince that police brutality is wrong. You're not the people that I have to convince that rioting is painful. Rioting is a result of pain to inflict pain. So it's overall painful. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying no, I'm not saying it's right, but I don't condemn it. If I'm grocery shopping and I see a kid and he's flailing and wailing, I'm not, you know, my immediate thought isn't just to be like, "Oh, what a rotten kid," but what is the parent doing is usually the first thing that comes into mind, right? And I feel like there's more that needs to be done within the US government that helps these minorities feel heard. And right now, we're pushing towards making them feel even more unheard. All the people that are being injured out there, all the people that, and this is just in general dividing so many people too, and like that breaks my heart. And I'm not directly involved in this, obviously, but human cruelty in whatever form it can take is disparaging. It's painful to look at because that could be me on either side. That could be me as a police officer. That could be me as, you know, a victim of police brutality. That could be me in the White House. That could be me talking about it on air as a celebrity. That could be me reading the biased articles. Any of these people can be you or me. Any of them. And in each of those situations, when all we're fed are these kind of tunnel vision stories, it's really difficult to see outside of it. I'm not going to have this stream go until 3 o'clock, so I'm actually going to end it in 10 minutes or less. So let me do my closing. I want to say, first of all, that I do not condone the rioting, but I do not necessarily condemn it. I think that there are lives being destroyed from the rioting by people who don't know what they're rioting for and people who do know what they're rioting for. And I think the voices are just being diluted at this point. I wish that people would be able to come together a little bit better. I don't think the riots are going to stop necessarily, and especially not in ways that we'd like for it to stop. I do hope that the positive that we get out of this is that the world can hear the screams of people who are hurting right now. I hope that I think it's a little too late for justice to be served. And I hope people have taken some time yesterday to do some research on their own to realize that everything that's happening right now has just been slowly repeating for the last 60 years. This is not a new thing. The taking a knee movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, the Blue Lives Matter movement that happened in reply, and then the All Lives Matter movement that came in reply to that, that's not at all new. The F12, again, sorry, I don't curse, but the F12 movement is actually from England, incidentally. And we're using it here. And that's, again, just evidence that this is not unique to the US. It's not a new thing. And I wish people would see that there has been not enough change in, again, at least 60 years. In at least 60 years, there was not enough change. That history is repeating itself in basically the same exact way. Police officers kill somebody that they really shouldn't have killed. The community breaks out, riots, gets upset. And the response is kind of different now, admittedly. But, yeah. So, if you're from the US, I invite you to not just look at the history of what's going on, because it's not just within this month or the end of last month that this all started. This goes back as far as the 1960s. And in 1967, look up the long, hot summer of 1967. Because those were a series of riots that resulted after police officers killed a black child. 17 years old, still a child to me. That was basically 60 years ago. Or if we want to get that specific, 53 years ago. Okay. But, yeah, no difference to me. If it's more than 6 months ago, that was a long time. At least to me. But, yeah, I would like to invite everyone to reflect a little bit more. To not look at what's happening and condemn it further, but instead to look at what's happening, try to listen and sympathize. If you have some child throwing a huge temper tantrum, you condemning the temper tantrum isn't going to stop it. It's not going to be that effective. But you being able to hold that child, understand why he's throwing that tantrum, making him feel heard, making him understand why, he can't have something, or just feeding him logic is what calms that child down. So I invite you to hear their voices. And I've made it my life phrase from many years ago, but the words I live by is to love and love profusely. There's no end to hate, but likewise there shouldn't be an end to love either. Love your neighbors, love yourself, that's important, and love the people you don't understand, because that'll help you understand them. So love and love profusely. Yeah, that's it for me for today. I will go back to gaming tomorrow. Thank you so much for your patience while I ranted on this subject that I admittedly said I'm never going to get into. So apologies also for that. But thank you. Thank you for dropping by, listening to me. Also teaching me a few new things. I always appreciate that. And yeah, thanks again. See you tomorrow. Bye.